These tools do not operate on words. These tools do not operate on words. They operate on tokens. And so the first thing to think about is when you put in to this tool text, what it does is it takes all word fragments and punctuation and maps them to tokens. A word, unlike normal natural language processing, is not an atomic, in the Greek sense, indivisible unit, but instead you're looking at the fragments of meaning that are self-consistent in its training data set. And so here you can see that space chat is one token, capital G is a second token, capital PT is a third token. And so what these tools do is they take your text, they turn the text into tokens, and they operate to predict the next token. They operate to predict the next token. The second term of art here, and this is, in order to use these tools effectively, this is what you must understand and be able to operate in your mind, the idea of a context window. A context window is the set of tokens that the model is predicting the next word off of. The context window is the set of tokens that the model is predicting the next word off of. Note, it has no differentiation between stuff it says and stuff you say. All of that goes together to predict the next word. However, that window is a sliding window. So if you want some really hilarious and embarrassing reading, look up the Bing Sydney debacle in February. Bing Sydney, where this is where reporters start, and it'll be in the New York Times, reporters started talking with Microsoft's just released chatbot, and the chatbot was trying to convince the reporter to divorce his wife for the chatbot. Now, sure, it's because the reporter was trying to provoke it. But what happened was the initial instructions from Microsoft slid out of the context window due to the lengthy conversation. And all it had was the most recent part of that conversation, such that it was reasonable to predict someone saying divorce your wife. The reason why the context window is so important is that to get the results that you want, you've got to populate the context window in a way that makes sense. If you think about this as a conversation, you will be sad. What you should do is instead think about it as, here's all of the input such that I get the output that I want. I find, personally, a sculpture comparison is very useful. What you're doing is you're carving away responses that are unlikely based on the parts of the internet that those words would occur in. So I, in my language, tend to be polite. I use capitals. I use please. I use punctuation. Think about the parts of the internet that use capitals and punctuation. By changing my register, I'm biasing the parts of the internet that it will be drawing. Note, this is not actually correct, but it's a useful metaphor. Drawing its responses from. But also, you'll notice in all of my examples and the links that I sent you, I very seldom start with what I care about. Because what I want that first exchange to be is to be set up to populate the context window such that subsequent parts of this exchange will give me the answer that I want. Which means that when I'm prompting it, I always start with role, broad overview, and task. Right? Act as a research assistant. We are going to be doing blah. First do this. And I usually put in some sort of validation step or an amplification step. Because it turns out that writing the instructions of what I want it to do is far too difficult. It's much better if it writes those instructions. And there's no difference between me writing those instructions and it writing those instructions, so long as those instructions appear in the context window. Demo time, yes. So because I say, what are the steps to do this? So for example, here, and this will be our first activity, I say, hi Bing, and note, I say this to this unthinking, non-sentient machine because I want it to pull from the internet where this sort of politeness and greeting stems from. For me, this produces more verbose responses that I find more useful to my tasks. You will figure out what sort of style of prompt works for you. I give it role. In many prompting exercises on the internet, they're going to say, you are the world's best, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't matter. All the role does is bias the resulting register of words. What sort of words, what sort of discipline will it be responding from? It won't make it better, but it will make it more authentic in its language. And then I give it task and validation. And so, for example, in a recent paper review, this is what I did. And so here, how do I get it to do it? Before we begin, can you tell me what some specific checks are that we can carry out per section or page? I don't want to write that. That sounds like a lot of work. So I get it to write, here's how you do an edit. And the thing is, it then treats that as valid input. So I don't have to do that. And I can read it over and I can say, yes, this makes sense. So remember that you are structuring all of the context window to give you the result that you want. There is no one there. It is endlessly patient. It is a face in the mirror, which means that if you are treating it like another person, you will end up with a subpar result. But if you treat it like programming, you will actually end up with a quite good result. And it's the kind of headspace that you're in when you're engaging with these tools. Like, you will notice that my language is not English-ish, right? It's, today I would like you to assume the role of a highly precise journal editor. We are going, like, you don't talk to another human, like, I hope, like that. But the thing is that there are certain registers that work to get it to produce the results that I want. And so I find myself falling into those registers. And there was a question over here. Yeah.
So let's say English, Chinese.
Yes. These things are trained on most of the English-speaking internet. There are Chinese-specific models. I cannot vouch their accuracy. There's some fascinating speculation that Chinese language models are having quite a lot of problem in terms of training because the numeral 8 and followed by the numeral 9 is a very problematic series of numerals in China. Tiananmen Square. But when you have to censor your training data, your output data is going to be worthless. So other languages, I've been running experiments in multiple units, are not nearly as good, but there are many attempts at experimenting with them. I've played with Arabic, I've played with Latin.
Based on what you said, if I ask it a question, or like
Yeah.
English, it draws from the English database.
Yeah.
In Chinese, it draws from...
So rather than using the term "it draws from the English database," it takes from the larger portion of the internet, which is English speaking, based on its training data, right? So don't think about this as databases. Think about this as pushing dough around or carving out a sculpture. You cannot precisely tell it what the answer is, but you can exclude vast swaths of the internet that the answer probably won't be taken from. It's weird. Your first prompt, your first prompt should be setting up the conversation. It should not be the give me the answer.
I'm just thinking it you know, after you put in your first prompt and then you've got I really should have.
Great question. So don't correct these things. Because think about the context window. The incorrect things are still going to be in its predictive words. So if it gets something wrong, reset. Because then it's not going to be drawing from a token that contains the incorrect information. Note that this is not the same as insufficient. If it's right but incomplete, keep going. That's great, right? You can see that I've got, I'm not quite there yet, right? So you can tweak, and that's not a problem. But if it makes a misstatement or confabulation, reset. Because you can't correct it. It will be very apologetic and then ignore you.
The lady gave up the back there a while ago. You can, though, can't you restrict in all of these Gen AI the source information that it comes from?
No.
So, for instance, to get the context window right, can't you say only look at articles published on
No.
Google Scholar?
Nope. Because it doesn't know what Google Scholar is. It doesn't search the web. It doesn't search the web. So you can't say only use articles from Google Scholar, because it will say, yes, of course I will, and then go on its way. So that's why I say it's the world's worst interface, because it doesn't give you an error, it agrees with you, and then ignores you. Right? You can give it these instructions, and it will say that it is complying with your instructions, and then it will disregard your instructions, because all it is actually doing is predicting the next word. Now, there's a great deal of nuance there. Different services are wired into search engines, so Bing Chat is wired into a search engine. But negative restrictions I have found are not very good. The way to think about this is that it transforms text, not searches for text. It transforms text. So what you do is you put in the articles you want it to operate upon and to transform them. And it's relatively good at that. But do not think about this like Google. Right? There is no database, there is no search engine, there is no authority measure. There is only what is the next word and how likely is the next word.
So if I ask a question, though, using lots of capitals, expressive...
Lol, what? Yeah.
Grammar, it'll only go to Donald Trump's...
It will... Yeah, no, 100%. It's really good at adapting tone. And so during a demo with some English faculty, I tried to speak like a typical undergraduate, lol what, like just all acronyms. And what I found is that it responded by getting a lot more authoritative, right? So that it took on the tone and register of an academic when I started typing like an undergraduate. So it's not that it mirrors your tone and register, it's that your tone and register influences where it pulls from. Metaphorically.
Does that mean that trying to use field-specific terms?
Yes. Can be quite effective, or can cause greater confabulation. This is why we're at the beginning and we have no real products, right? This is art. This is not a science. We have no idea how these stupid things work in practice. You will need to figure out your own way of interacting with them. But they're useful. You can actually get good outputs from them, so long as you don't treat them like a person behind the mirror. The derogatory term is stochastic parrot. So there is a really good paper using that in its title. So yeah, it mimics language. That is exactly what it's doing. A, it resets every time you make a new session. And B, depending on which chatbot you use, you get either 4,000, 8,000, 32,000, or 100,000 tokens. So think of it as the context window works for a session, one conversation, and then is lost.
Yeah, it's per session.
So if you spend an hour teaching it, oh, here's how you do this thing, and you're like, great, it's learned. And then tomorrow you come back and it's got you're all ready to go, and you've got a new fresh interface, and it's like, hey, do this thing. It will have utterly forgotten because there's no data storage.
You're like,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, you like, and so Ethan Mollick has written one of the people that I cite quite often has written a wonderful blog post that says, now is the time for grimoires. Literal spell books of incantations that work. I'm not kidding, and he's not kidding, that if you have collections of initial prompts that do what you want them to do, write them down, right? I have this block of text is basically in my mental grimoire because this produces results most of the time that I find useful. So this is a time for incantations. I'm not kidding, and that's terrifying.
Just to clarify the concept of token,
Yes.
it's kind of like a morpheme, but how the large language model would break it up rather than have.
No. Noting that I'm not a linguist. Please do not tar and feather me, because I know we have a population in the audience. Morphemes have a relationship to meaning. And so if you think about tokens as morphemes, you will end up being sorry, right? Tokens are numbers. This is literally the matrix. There's no semantic weight to these fragments. There's merely statistical slicing. So yes, it looks a lot like a morpheme, but I suspect that there aren't any morphemes that are space open paren, right? And so if you think about them as morphemes, I think you will end up in the wrong place.
So my question actually starts from her point, because I think like previously in the chat in the Bing Chat, they actually allows you to keep a very long conversation.
Yes.
And that process actually works like a fine tuning, but they don't allow us to do it anymore.
Correct. Because otherwise it will try to convince you to divorce the wife that you don't have. Specifically, that is why in conversations you have this 1 of 30. And when you get to 30 exchanges back and forth, you have to reset the conversation.
Context window's been set each.
So the context window is being reset every time you click new topic. Okay. Holy digressions, Batman. So yes, and that's why I made Dolly on Bing Chat make this bucket sloshing over with data, because when you overfill the context window, the old stuff will dribble out the sides. You only get so many tokens, and as you keep putting more tokens in, your old tokens will vanish. Now, this is weird because it will look like, as you're carrying on this conversation, that it's going, and that's fine, because the most recent stuff is still there, and predictively, the most recent set is a function of your initial set, which means that there is a certain degree of continuity. But that's a statistical continuity because the words that started the context window probabilistically had a precedent, right? They had your prompt, not because it still knows about your prompt. This, by the way, is why it is so bad at writing long fiction. Because you set up all the fiction, you set up the dramatis personae, and then it starts writing, and then all that setup sloshes out the sides of the bucket. There are ways of getting around it, as you can see in the journal edit that I did, but if you don't understand the idea of the context window, it just looks like a really bad product. So, tokens, context window. Everyone happy with these concepts? Getting lots of nodding? Fantastic.